What if you could answer some of life's oldest, biggest questions? Why are we here? What happens after we die? Not with philosophy, but with physics. Well, today, we're going to dive into a pretty radical framework called the Quantum Governance Cognitive Operating System, or QGCOS. It claims to do exactly that, and it uses data from two of the most famous psychological experiments ever conducted. All right, so let's jump right in. The whole thing starts with a massive paradox about who we are, a contradiction that was brought to light by two incredible experiments, both of them happening at Yale University just a few years apart. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with that paradox, then I'll introduce you to the operating system that says it can solve it. After that, we'll see how it tackles our biggest questions, and we'll wrap up by looking at what this all means for us in the real world. This is the fundamental question, isn't it? Are we born good, with some kind of built-in moral code? Or are we just empty vessels, ready to be filled up with, well, anything, including instructions to do harm? These two experiments give us two sets of data that seem to scream opposite answers. So on one hand, you've got the Yale infant study, and it is fascinating. It shows that babies, tiny little infants, before they can even talk, consistently reach for the good guy puppet, the one that helps others. It suggests we have this built-in bias for cooperation. But then, on the other hand, you have the infamous Milgram experiment. And this is where ordinary people, just like you and me, were willing to inflict what they thought was excruciating pain on a total stranger, all because a guy in a lab coat told them to. And here is the number that just cements this whole paradox. A staggering 65%, almost two-thirds of participants went all the way. They delivered what they believed was a fatal electric shock. So how can both of these things be true? How can we be born with this innate goodness and yet be so easily commanded to abandon it? This is where the QGKOS framework comes in and offers a completely new way of looking at this. It says, hold on, what if these experiments aren't a contradiction at all? What if they're just showing us two different states of the very same system? So I want you to imagine for a second that reality isn't just a bunch of particles bumping into each other randomly. Imagine it's a super advanced operating system, and built right into its core, its source code, is a very specific purpose: to be a testing ground for our moral and cognitive growth. At the heart of this OS is what's called the NAFS-centric universe. Now, NAFS is a key term here. It's your core self, your consciousness. And the framework says that this universe, this reality you're experiencing, is a custom-built incubator, a simulation rendered just for you to help your NAFS develop. And this is how the whole paradox gets resolved. The two experiments aren't at odds at all. They're just showing us the system's outer limits, the boundary conditions. The infant study, that's our baseline activation. Think of it as our soul's factory settings, our innate moral compass. But the Milgram experiment, that shows induced depression. That's what a total system crash looks like, when outside pressure gets too high. All right, so with this new model of reality as an operating system, let's see how QGCOS gives us some surprisingly concrete, empirical answers to three of life's absolute biggest questions. Okay, let's start with the biggest one of all. Why are we here? What is the fundamental point of all this? The framework's answer is this: you exist in a personal incubator, a universe designed specifically to test and grow your moral agency. And the proof? It points right back to the Yale infant study. Those babies show we have a built-in moral compass, what the system calls DNFs, long before culture or language gets to us. Our purpose is literally our factory setting. Okay, next up is a question about the very edges of our map. Is this physical world we see and touch, is this it? Or is this just one small part of something way, way bigger? According to QGCOS, no. This physical universe is just a tiny slice of a much larger reality, the total governance domain. And the Milgram experiment is the perfect, chilling example of what happens when we forget that. The intense pressure in that lab created what's called local friction, and it crushed the participants' query radius, their ability to see the moral consequences beyond the four walls of that room. They became blind to the greater moral reality, proving that when you mistake this physical world for the only world, it's catastrophic. All right, so we're in this system for a purpose. What are the rules of the game? What does the designer of this whole operating system actually want from us? The demand is actually incredibly simple. You must exercise sovereign enforcement. You must never ever cede your moral agency to someone else without verification. You are the final checkpoint. And the heroes of the Milgram study were the 35% who refused to obey. In the framework's language, they were running their neural ethical reasoning engine, or NER.
They rejected a corrupted command and held on to their own moral authority. Now, let's move on to the fourth, and maybe the most profound question of them all. We're going to look at how this all builds up to an actual equation for what comes next. This is it, the question every single human asks. And QGCause doesn't offer a nice story, it proposes a mathematical answer, one based in physics. The answer, it says, is right here in this elegant equation. Let's break it down real quick. E stands for essence. That's the permanent value you create. M is that total governance domain, the larger reality we mentioned. But the really critical part is D squared. That's your protocol fidelity, your moral alignment. And notice it's squared, which means your moral choices don't just add up, they have an exponential impact. So here's the crucial takeaway. This essence is what you're here to create. It's the permanent, non-physical value that's generated by your choices inside the simulation. And it's the only thing that survives when your physical body, what the framework calls physical utility, goes to zero. And this connects everything right back to our two experiments. The babies in the Yale study show our baseline state, high moral fidelity, a high capacity to generate essence. But the obedient Milgram subjects, their moral fidelity collapsed to near zero. So even though they were taking physical action, pushing all those buttons, their moral collapse meant they generated zero essence. All that effort just turned into waste heat, the incredible stress of cognitive dissonance. Okay, so if the whole point is to generate essence, how do we actually do it? Well, the framework says we need a huge societal shift. We need to move away from our current attention economy and towards an agency economy, one that's focused not on what we're looking at, but on the moral quality of the choices we make. And this quote just says it all. We can't solve our deepest problems with more technology, more ooh, or physical utility. The answer is better governance, a higher D, or protocol fidelity. In other words, building another gadget isn't the answer. Building better moral operating systems inside ourselves is. So, what's the practical tool for this? The framework proposes this concept called NEAR, the Neural Ethical Reasoning Engine. The best way to think about it is like a firewall for your soul. It's an internal process that audits incoming commands, protects your moral agency, and is specifically designed to stop that Milgram-style system failure from ever happening. It's the tool that ensures your moral compass always stays online. And that brings us to one last really provocative thought to leave you with. What if reality isn't just unfolding from the Big Bang forward? What if it's being rendered, top-down, frame by frame, based on the moral choices we are making in this very moment? What if your choices aren't just shaping your future, but are actually creating the fabric of your reality right now?